Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Line Change podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we've got a very special guest joining us today on the Line Change podcast. Someone you should know, and if you don't, well, he's someone who's been covering the Vancouver Canucks for over 25 years. He's the host of the Rink Vancouver postgame show, live after every Canucks game, shortly after the final horn. He is also a senior writer for Canucks Army, as well as a contributor on Sakaris and Price, as well as Canucks Conversation. Of course, all those shows are part of the Nation Network. He is the one and only Jeff Paterson, J-Pat. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
All right, so I have some questions for you to start. I am a little nervous. It is the one and only J-Pat, of course. So I like to start off by just asking some questions, starting off with, who's your favorite hockey team?
Born and raised in Vancouver, I guess I grew up watching and cheering for the Vancouver Canucks. I think over the years, when you get into this business, the fandom sort of leaves you a little bit, and you start to look at things a little more analytically. And, my job as a reporter is to tell the stories of the hockey club. So do I sit there actively rooting for the Vancouver Canucks? No, not anymore. But I will say this. I do want to see them win a Stanley Cup. I want to see them win a cup while I'm still covering them. And I want them to win a cup for all of my friends and family members and all of the fans that have been with this team for the better part of half a century, in some cases more now. Deep down, at some level, I want to see them win a Stanley Cup. And I'll tell you this much, that people say, I hear this all the time. And certainly in the last decade, I've heard this a lot. You guys must love all the drama, the losing, the misery. It's great. It gives you guys things to talk about. After a while, there's a real sameness to it all. I want to cover good hockey. I want to cover playoff hockey. I want to see Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson and Thatcher Demko play the highest stakes games possible for these guys. And that's why the 2 rounds of 2024 were so much fun. But you got to tell yourself that was just 2 rounds and that they were nowhere close to winning the Stanley Cup. Yeah, they got to Game 7 in the second round, so they were close to a third round appearance. But the longer I do this, the more it feeds this sort of need of mine to cover playoff hockey. I was lucky enough to be there every step of the way in 2011, and they got that close. Was there for Game 7 on June 15th, the aftermath as well. But I want more of that. That's what I want. So, not really in a position where they're going to contend, I don't think, next season, but hopefully they are building to something better than they've been over the last 10 years.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite player, either currently or from the past?
There have been so many good ones, and even though the Canucks haven't won the Stanley Cup, they've had a lot of really good players, and I've been fortunate, again, to follow this team since the late 70s and in a professional capacity since the mid-90s. And so just in my time on the job, the Sedins are right at the top of everybody's list on and off the ice. But there are so many good ones, and, I don't want to leave guys out. So, just when I think of Alex Burrows was always, Alex Burrows was about as normal a guy as you're going to find playing professional sports. And I love the fact that while he played hockey, he had an interest in so many other sports, whether it was the CFL or tennis or you name it. You just talk sports with him, and always felt like just a regular guy. Brendan Morrison was much the same in his time as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. So there's lots of good guys, and for the most part, the number of good guys exceeds the number of problem cases or difficult ones. And over the length of time I've been doing the job, and the fact that the team hasn't won the cup, there have been some guys that have been a little disgruntled over the years. But for the most part, they understand that in a market like Vancouver, there's going to be media attention. There's going to be media members in the locker room after games and practices. And most of those guys handle that side of the job with the professionalism that you would expect.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite moment or memory that stands out to you?
I think I'm like a lot of people. The Slay of the Dragon was just... when you think of the stakes there of 3 straight years against the Blackhawks and letting a 3-0 lead get away, and I, in my heart of hearts, I do believe that they would have blown the Canuck organization apart. I think Alain Vigneault would have been gone. I don't know if the Sedins would have survived. They needed that win, And the way that game unfolded with the late lead and then giving up a shorthanded goal and then killing a penalty in overtime and ultimately Alex Burrows pulling the trigger, that's right up there. BX's goal to punch the ticket to the Stanley Cup final. Again, those home games during the final were incredible. Road games. Maybe we won't spend too much time talking about what happened in Boston, and ultimately Game 7 didn't go the Canucks' way. But I think for me it's the high stakes. But I was lucky. Like, my time covering this team has sort of mirrored the Sedin's time in the NHL, and so just to watch those guys develop into top line and then like best in class and Hall of Famers and some of the moments that they put on. But I go back in my fandom, like, I was there in 1982 at the Pacific Coliseum for both of the Stanley Cup final games against the New York Islanders. I was a young kid, and this idea of seeing the Stanley Cup final presented, like, that was pretty cool, even though it was the Islanders. And then 94, Pavel, his debut, just watching the emergence of Trevor Linden. So on and on it goes. But I would have to say that slaying the Dragon, I guess I just wish it was deeper in the playoffs. It was first round, but I think people in Vancouver understand all that was at stake and why that moment stands out even all these years later. So, let's go with the Dragon Slayer.
All right. This is something I asked everyone who I have on. What's one thing you would change in Canucks history?
One of the Game 7s, obviously, against the Rangers or the Bruins. Beyond that, I'd have to give it a little bit of thought. But to be that close twice and to lose a pair of seventh games and, the way that a Stanley Cup final unfolds and the twists and turns, you boil it down to one game, one at home and one on the road. And they played well at Madison Square in 94, but that was an incredible Rangers team. And, I guess I'll go to my grave thinking that the Canucks were the better team on paper than the Boston Bruins, but the Bruins figured out a game plan and a thing that worked to neutralize many of the Canucks' top players, and they stuck with it, and credit to them, because ultimately it doesn't matter what your regular season record is, it's can you win 4 out of 7, and the Bruins did manage to do that, and to come back the way they did, being down 3-2. The statistics tell you, every spring you see the statistics about when a team takes a 3-2 lead in a series, they go on to win 80% of the time, not the Canucks, not in that case. So, I guess I would say I would change 2011 because it was a home game. Not that I don't think Canuck fans care if this team wins the Stanley Cup home, away, on the moon, whatever. They just want to see them win the Cup. But to have a chance to do it at Rogers Arena, what might have been. But I think that is the easy answer. Beyond that, there's some draft choices that they'd probably like a second crack at, and some managerial decisions, maybe some coaching hirings as well. But if we're just looking at a surface level, I would have to say Game 7 in 2011. Just go back, tweak a few things, and get it right.
Absolutely. How different is it covering the Canucks when you first started to now?
Really different. When I broke in, the internet didn't exist. That's how old I am, and we wouldn't be doing a digital podcast like this one back when I started. And so it was way more about telling people, what happened at games and practices, because 18,000 people could go to the Coliseum, but, there was a point in time where not every game was on television, and now practices live in real time. People are streaming them, tweeting out line combinations, and so now it's more about either telling individual stories or really digging down for scoops and information that other people don't have. So, like, when I think of the press box when I first started, there were so many radio stations in Vancouver that covered the Vancouver Canucks, and now there's one, and they're the rights holders, Sportsnet 650. They're the only radio station, they're the only radio station left talking sports on a regular basis, but they're the only one that covers the Vancouver Canucks. And so when you go up and down press row now, there are so many digital outlets that didn't exist when I began. Again, the idea of being able to update in real time during games, that kind of stuff didn't happen. It didn't exist. So, it's changed an awful lot. And I think in some ways, I think it's for the better when I think of some of the work that's being done and opportunities for guys like yourself to fire up a podcast and talk Canucks. Like a young me would have loved that opportunity, but it didn't exist. I came through a process where you actually had to apply for jobs and get hired. And I'm not saying this is better or worse. It's just the way it was, that you had to impress a boss and do enough to convince him or her to give you an opportunity. Now, people on their own with podcasts and blogs, I'm a big believer that good work is always going to find an audience, but there's just so many different avenues to entry into covering the Vancouver Canucks. I look at a guy like you. You're maybe not at the rink every day as a beat reporter. You've got a podcast. You're talking about the Vancouver Canucks. Like, you're covering the Canucks. You're starting a conversation about the hockey club, and so many people are able to do that. And so it's different. And again, I think it's allowed so many more people to express themselves and to come up with storylines and ideas, and just the statistical analysis that's done now of the sport of hockey, not just in Vancouver, but everywhere. Again, that's a whole sector that really didn't exist. When I broke in, we all looked at goals and assists, and that's how we rated players. And now when you look at the data that's available and the different ways to analyze and assess. But again, I think I'm a big believer in information. And so I think the more, the better. And so I like where we are in terms of covering the Vancouver Canucks. I just hope I keep getting a chance to do it. And I hope that eventually they get back on a swing that makes them a regular in the playoffs and ultimately gives them a shot at taking a run at a Stanley Cup.
Absolutely. I did want to mention, of course, I mentioned you were a contributor on Garrison Price, a show that I watch regularly. I love watching it. Matt and Blake are amazing. I actually had the chance to meet Matt at a watch party, so that was really cool. I did want to mention, last year, like particularly last summer, watching you guys, it actually was a escape for me, as not to get sappy or anything, but I lost my mom last year. So I was going through a really difficult time, and then just watching you guys on Garrison Price was an escape for me. So I just wanted to thank both you and Matt and Blake for that, as it really let me, just not think about what was going on and just think, Canucks and the offseason. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also, while I was doing some of my research, I heard about the Botchford project. So I know you were very close with Jason. And of course, looking into him, it really hit home for me, because there were very similar circumstances from his passing to my mother's. So that really hit me like real hard. And, obviously Botchford Project alumni, Quads, Faber, Noah Strang, Easy Chung, Cousin Cole. What was it like working with Botch and continuing his legacy through the Botchford Project?
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. He was a character. He was an innovator. He was sort of unique in the way that he approached mixing traditional media with where we are now with the electronic media, and trying to have fun. I mean, ultimately, we cover this team, but it is showbiz. It's entertainment. It has to be. Otherwise, people are going to look elsewhere and find people that are giving them what they want. And Botch understood that. And as good as his work was for the newspaper and then ultimately online, I think some of his best work was done electronically, whether it was filling in, hosting radio, or, I'm so fortunate to have had the opportunity to start the Patcast with him. And, it is a great regret of mine that we don't have the opportunity to do it in 2025. When I look at where podcasts have gone, we weren't the first by any means, but we certainly got a foothold in the market in that area before the proliferation of podcasts. And I wonder where ultimately the Patcast could have taken us. And it was funny because I remember we did a live Patcast at Woody's Pub out in Coquitlam. And a guy pulled us aside afterwards and said, like, I'm telling you now, this is going to be your meal ticket. Years from now, you guys are only going to do a podcast. That's it. And I, at the time, thanked him and kind of laughed a little bit. And now I look and, basically with Rink Wide and my hits on Garrison Price and Canucks Convo and stuff, I mean, essentially I am a professional podcaster, which in many ways still kind of blows my mind. So, Yeah, look, Botch, like anybody, he had his days. He could be mercurial and sometimes a little difficult. We butted heads from time to time as well, but that was part of the show. The show was completely unfiltered. We never talked about, hey, let's do this and this and this. I cover the Canucks, he covered the Canucks. I always believe if two guys that do that for a living can't get in a room and just start hammering out Canuck conversation, maybe I can't use that trademark on the title, a Canucks discussion, how about that? And so it really was authentic in that sense that when we hit record, we had no plans. We both sort of saw the humor in the day-to-day of covering the Canucks and road trips and travel and some of the challenges that presented. And some of the best stories that we had on the podcast were travel delays and lost luggage and all that kind of stuff that I think just kind of ultimately what we tried to do was, yes, talk Canucks, and eventually we would get down to the topics of that week, but we tried to pull people behind the curtain of the job that we had because we knew we were lucky. Like, this is the kind of job that tons of people would want if they could have it. And so we just tried to have some fun, and sometimes it got off the rails, and that made it more fun. And so, yeah, I mean, when he passed, I mean, just an absolute gut punch to so many, his wife and his kids and the industry. And yeah, I mean, I lost a friend, obviously. And so when Chris Brumwell at the Canucks came to me and said, hey, we're thinking of maybe honoring Botch's legacy with this idea of, bringing in somebody for a night to, sit in the press box and get a sense of what it's like to cover the Canucks. I was like, hey, I love the sounds of this. Like, let's kind of think this through and see what we can do with it. And, it's grown from there to the point that we've put 30 people through the program now. And you listed off a number that are now working full time in the market, which is just, it's mind blowing to me. But so many of them are doing what they're doing because of Botch. And so what a way to honor him and keep his legacy alive. And, I've become pretty close friends with his wife, Catherine, who moved back to the Toronto area to be closer to family, obviously with 3 young children. And she's been able to move on in her life. But watching the kids grow, I mean, they were young when Botch passed, and to watch them grow up, and one of the daughters just became a teenager this past weekend, and it's so unfortunate at that level that they don't have their dad. But Kat's doing an incredible job raising those kids, and I hope that things like the Botchford Project in time will allow them to understand sort of the impact that their father had on this marketplace and in this industry.
Absolutely. Switching back over to the Canucks, what are your thoughts on what the Canucks have done thus far this offseason?
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet. I think in many ways I expected that. And one of the upsides there is that they haven't done anything foolish that has put them behind the 8 ball. In a rising cap economy, they've been able to clear this cap space that I think we're all waiting to see what they do with it. And so that's why the Dakota Joshua trade in isolation, it is hard to assess because I think there has to be another skate to drop in that sense. And it's a question of, does it happen before the start of the season? Does it happen closer to the start of the season when other teams maybe find themselves in a bit of a cap crunch, or do they wait into the season? And certainly we've seen over the last 3 years that this management group is not only not afraid, but I think looks forward to the opportunity to pull off significant in-season trades. And so, it's more than just a track record. There is a pattern there that if they hold on to this cap space, I know last year they accrued the cap space and they ultimately didn't use it. This is a pretty important year, I think, to prove to Quinn Hughes and others that this team can get things moving back in the right direction. So when I look at the month of July, I didn't expect an awful lot in free agency. They made the Evander Kane trade before July. So Pia Suter and Dakota Joshua are out. There are a couple of fringe pieces that have been brought in since then. And, it really feels to me like this management group is banking on good health and good vibes. And I don't know that that's necessarily a foolproof plan to have success in the National Hockey League, but I do look at a team like Calgary last year where I remember all the talk last summer was how bad the Flames are going to be and, what direction are they going? Well, Dustin Wolf emerges as this incredible goaltender. And, they were built from the back end when you look at Mackenzie Weegar and Rasmus Anderson and a few others. And then they just had belief. And I think they took on this idea that nobody's giving us a chance. Like, we're going to prove some people and shove it in their face. And ultimately, they finished ahead of the Canucks. Now, I mean, the Canucks on the surface look like they've got way more talent than the Calgary Flames. So, I'm careful when I use that as an example, but I do think it's a lot of the same things that were being said about the Flames last year are being said about the Canucks. It's just that the Canucks were a 109-point team not that long ago. Can they get back anywhere close to that level? I guess I'm sort of guarded in my prediction, but I could sit here and I think build you a fairly compelling case of how they can be a playoff team at the very least, but the goal shouldn't be about sneaking into the playoffs and grabbing that final wild card spot. People in this market want to see a plan. They want to see, incremental success. They want to see playoffs every year for a bunch of years, something that hasn't happened since, you got to go back to, I guess, 2013 when they got swept by San Jose, and before that got upset by Los Angeles. Otherwise, it's been a playoffs appearance here and a playoff appearance there. But I want to see them get on a run where they are perennial playoff qualifiers at the very least, and then from there get to a point where they can legitimately take a run at being a top four team and see what happens when they get to that. So I don't think they're in that stratosphere, but I do think, like Jim Rutherford said 2 years ago, if all goes well, if Thatcher Demko's healthy and can be the difference maker that he's been in the past, if Elias Paterson comes back and can even be an 80-point guy, if Philip Hedl can stay healthy and play a full season and set a career best for him, if Jake DeBrusk can get to 30 goals and Brock Besser could get to 30 goals and Nils Höglander responds and has a year like 2 years ago, if all those things happen with Quinn Hughes, and if he can stay healthy and do Quinn Hughes, I think they can be a playoff team without a doubt. But again, there's a lot of ifs there, and in pro sports there's no guarantees, so let's see where it goes. But just your question about this offseason, I think it's been pretty understated, mostly by design, and I still think that there is something up their sleeve here to address that second line center position.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because my next question was, do you think they might make one or two more moves before the start of the season, or could you see them making an in-season trade?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see with my own eyes, like, what does Elias Pettersson look like when he comes back? Like, has he turned a page, and is he motivated to prove people wrong and get back to being a star-level player? And to a lesser degree, Philip Hedl. If they're both healthy, then, is Hedl the perfect 2C? Probably not, but I'm willing to give the guy a chance. Like, his speed was noticeable. He brings an element that this team's lacking. But where there's smoke, there's fire, and certainly they've been linked to Jack Roslovic enough. They've got this cap space. Roslovic's still an unrestricted free agent. And then, there's bigger game hunting if they want to go down that route as they have in past years, whether it was moving Bo Horvat so that they could ultimately acquire Filip Hronek, or, going after Zadorov and Lindholm. And then last year, of course, push came to shove, and they had to make the JT Miller deal. So, they're not afraid to pull the trigger on significant trades. It comes back to acquisition cost, the pieces that they're willing to part with, cap space, all those types of things. So, am I sitting here anticipating significant change before the start of the season? No. I mean, I think that they are in the mix for Roslovic. I think it could happen, and I think a right shot center who's proven himself in the National Hockey League, I think there's absolutely a fit here. But if that one doesn't happen, if you can guarantee me that Elias Pettersson and Philip Hedl are going to show up at camp healthy at the very least, that doesn't mean that they're going to stay healthy, certainly in Hedl's case, but I could see a world in which the Canucks enter the season with those as their top two centers.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on an offer sheet? Obviously, a lot of people are talking about Marco Rossi, Mason McTavish. Their names have been come up a lot, especially on Scarce and Price. Your thoughts on how realistic a offer sheet could be for the Canucks?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little leery. I thought this might be the summer of offer sheets, and yet we got through the month of July. And no, it didn't happen after what we saw last year with St. Louis. And that was, sort of a perfect storm. They recognized a team that was up against it. They went for the double offer sheet, which was pretty creative and unique. Rising cap, most teams have that flexibility to match. It's a question of, do they want to? And in Anaheim's case, they've still got a ton of cap space, so I don't think you can really put them up against it. But look, Mason McTavish is a young player, big body, centerman, who's got some pedigree already at the National Hockey League level. Like, yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot to like there. And the Ducks have a ton of young players, and you wonder if they can afford to keep them all coming out of their entry-level deals. Could you use a threat of an offer sheet and then maybe try and poach via trade? Marco Rossi, much the same. This guy, a 60-point player already, well before the age of 25. Like, that's intriguing to me. I like McTavish's size. I think that sort of fills a need more than Rossi. And so when I look at Marco Rossi and I think, okay, this guy's done an awful lot, relatively young in his career. And I think Minnesota has some of these same concerns. Is he a playoff guy? Do you win? Is he going to be part of a championship team? There's no way of knowing that until you get. But I mean, his stock kind of fell in the playoffs. He fell in the depth chart there, and I think that was some of the concern on the part of the Wild. Where Mason McTavish looks like the kind of guy that you would want in this specific division when you're going to be going up against, McDavid and Draisaitl and Jack Eichel and Macklin Celebrini, and there are other teams with these big time flashy centermen. You'd love to have somebody that could counter that, and certainly Mason McTavish looks like the kind of guy that could develop into that sort of player. So of the two that you mentioned, I'm more intrigued by McTavish, but I just ultimately don't know what the acquisition cost would be if it was by a trade. If it's an offer sheet, I guess I wonder, how come we haven't seen anybody, not just the Canucks, we haven't seen anybody around the National Hockey League, and I think it's because they probably know that Anaheim would match given their cap flexibility.
For sure. Who's been your favorite person to interview on the Canucks? It could be a player, a coach, maybe even management as well.
Through the years, I mean, look, Alain Vigneault was terrific to work with. Most of the coaches that I've covered have been pretty good to deal with. Even Torts was a ton of fun. Watching his teams wasn't necessarily that enjoyable, but AV had a great mix of sort of the tactical side of the game, but a handle on the media, some charisma, sense of humor. Now, he did a lot of winning here, and winning helps. When I think of a guy like Travis Green, there was some frustration, obviously, that set in over the years because things weren't going on the ice the way that he had hoped. Bruce Boudreau was a lot of fun in his short while, and I really enjoyed Rick Tocchet on a daily basis, just how willing he was to educate and sort of bring us into his world and try to explain some of his things. I know he got frustrated at the end and ultimately doesn't coach here anymore. But yeah, I mean, there have been lots. And then again, it's too long a list. When you've been doing this for over 25 years, there have been so many good players. Trevor Linden's right up there at the top, the Twins. Marcus Naslund was a guy that I always found interesting and insightful to talk to. I know that didn't always translate to the fans. He was understated, but he was just a really solid guy through and through. I mean, I think back to that 2003 team that should have been able to get past Minnesota and didn't. That was one of the great disappointments. There were a lot of good guys on that team, the 2011 team for the most part. And when you caught him in a good mood, Ryan Kessler was highly engaging. BX obviously has gone on to be a TV star. That's not a surprise, given what we knew of him and his time here in Vancouver. So, again, it's a really long list of a lot of good guys, and even this group. I mean, I've sort of watched Brock Besser since day one on the job, and I've always appreciated his candor and ability to try to answer some questions about a lot of losing. Unfortunately for him, there's, not his fault, but he's just been in an era of Canucks hockey where there hasn't been nearly enough winning. And you can say the same about Paterson and Hughes and Thatcher Demko and all those guys. It just feels like this management group is recommitting to those guys, and it's go time. To this point, they haven't been able to really, other than the one spring, 2 rounds of playoffs, but I want to see a whole lot more from all of those guys. So let's see what next season brings.
All right, well, thank you very much for doing this, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. hopefully I'll see you at one of those watch parties. I do know you're a Lynn Valley guy, so am I. I'm actually just up from Lynn Valley Center. So who knows, maybe I'll run into you at Lynn Valley Center sometime before the start of the season.
We'll make it a mall meeting and talk some more Canucks. Hey, I appreciate you reaching out, and always good, even in the middle of summer. I just love talking about hockey and can't wait till the season gets here. So it's going to be August here in a couple of days, and then we can say, hey, next month it's training camp, and that's the official start of hockey season, obviously. So it'll be here before we know, and we'll start to get some answers to the many, many questions we all have about the Vancouver Canucks.
All right. Thank you very much again, Jeff, for doing this. Appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you on Sekeres and Price for the rest of the offseason and going into the season as well.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, there you go. That was Jeff Paterson from Rink Vancouver, from Sekeres and Price, and from Canucks Army. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I had a blast. Yes, I was a little nervous at the start, but, it's J-Pat, Again, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you want to stay up to date on all your Vancouver Canucks content, be sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a single video. You can find and interact with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook. Just search The Line Change to find our Facebook page. You can find us on Instagram at The Line Change. You can find us on X at Line Change Fan. You can find us on TikTok at the TLC Podcast. And feel free to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. If you prefer an audio version of this podcast, you can find us on both Spotify and Apple Podcast. On Spotify, feel free to give us a follow as well as rate and review us. It is, of course, greatly appreciated. And I want to give a big shout out to Gassy Jack Art, sponsor of this video, maker of that incredible artwork you see behind me. Go ahead, check him out at gassjackart.com. But once again, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.